Thanks, everybody. I'm glad that you're here right before lunch. Hopefully we'll be moving quickly and keeping you nice and awake. I'm going to try to stay over on this side of the stage so we don't have like poll situation. Ooh, but maybe that's a speaker problem. We're going to balance right in the middle. Okay, so we have 30 minutes, and I'm a quick slide flipper. So if you are one of these people that really likes to have the slides and take the photos, you may not have time to do that. So drop me your business card at the end, and I will send them to you by the end of the day, and the conference will also send them out. But if you like to have slides, just drop me your business card, and I'll send them right over to you. So before we get started, I want to take a quick poll. How many of you are right now using Scrum to manage your work in one way or another? Hands up. Okay, good. And then how many of you know what Scrum is? At least you're familiar. Okay, so we are right on track here for the matching up to this slide pretty well. So these are the results of version 1's 2018 State of Agile survey, and they put it out every year, and this chart looks like this pretty much every year. Most people in the world of software and IT favor the use of Scrum. That's their preferred framework. And I'm not up here to spend the next 29.5 minutes Scrum bashing or talking bad about this framework that we all know and enjoy. I don't have a problem with Scrum necessarily. My problem comes when we start treating Scrum the way that Gus Portocullis treats Windex. Now, if you're familiar with Gus, he's from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and he firmly believes that any physical ailment that you may have can be cured by the application of Windex. No matter what's wrong with you, you just put some Windex on it, and you'll be fine. And marketers in particular have started to treat Scrum the same way. Whatever's going on, we're missing our deadlines, everything's coming out late, just put some Scrum on it, and it's going to be okay. Our MQLs are not meeting their targets this quarter. We just need more Scrum, and everything will be fine. Our marketing director stubbed her toe on the way into work. Just put some Scrum on it, and everything's going to work out. It doesn't always work out that way, because even in the environment for which it was originally designed, software, Scrum runs into some typical problems. And these problems are even more pronounced in the world of marketing, for which Scrum was not designed. So those of you who are using Scrum may feel some anxiety with these next few slides, for which I apologize. These are common ways that Scrum can break. So the first one is known as the Scrummer coaster. Now, this is where we put a project into our sprint backlog, and we're super excited. We're going to get it done in the first sprint, because that's what Scrum is for, right? We deliver valuable increments of work at the end of every sprint. But then the sprint goes on, and our happy little project goes round and round. And then at the end of the sprint, it's not actually finished. And so it goes to the next one. And it goes round and round the Scrummer coaster again. And yet, by the end of sprint 2, we're still not done. We haven't delivered a valuable increment of work. We're just putting this same project through sprint after sprint after sprint. And it goes round and round. The other common way that Scrum breaks, particularly in marketing, is when we are faced with the Emoji Cycle. So we start off at the beginning of the sprint, and we have built a beautiful sprint backlog, and everything is great, and it's all going to work out so well, and we're all so excited. The sprint is planned beautifully. We've got user stories and estimation, and all this stuff is fantastic. We're cruising right along till you get about a third of the way through, and then everyone starts to look at the backlog and think, we haven't actually finished nearly as much as we should have by now. And this might actually not be as well planned of a sprint as we thought. And we're getting a little concerned. Maybe everyone starts working a little bit longer at this point because we're not sure we're going to make it. Worry and anxiety grows on the team. We start beating ourselves up a little bit, like, did we plan wrong? What's going on? Are we not using this thing the right way? People start getting upset with each other. This is your fault. You overestimated how quickly you could do this, or you underestimated the complexity of this project. Things are not going well. And by the end, we're just appalled at how little we actually accomplished through this methodology that's supposed to speed up productivity. And then the end of the sprint is something a little like this. Not necessarily anything to blame with Scrum or the teams that are experiencing this. It's just a matter of not using the right tools to solve the problem, and particularly in the world of marketing. So this is the sort of flip side to that chart I showed you earlier. This is from the, I don't know if you can, there, you can see it here. This is from the State of Agile Marketing report that my company Agile Sherpas put out earlier this year. And when we surveyed Agile marketers, you can see that the results look very, very different than what Software and IT reports. Hybrid methodologies are by far the most common. Marketers do best when we can pick and choose from amongst all the various Agile frameworks to design something that's customized and useful for our unique ways of working. So you can see very few marketers are saying they're using pure Scrum, very few are using pure Kanban. We're picking and choosing. But the only way that we can do this intelligently and effectively is by understanding all the practices that are out there and available to us. And so that is what I want to spend the rest of our time together today, helping to bring to light some of the less common practices from the world of Kanban. So we're going to talk about 5 of the core practices that make up the Kanban framework. Now, Kanban is pretty nifty because it's designed to fit on top of however you're working right now. You can start using it the minute you leave this room, and you don't have to change anything about the way that you work, which makes it very powerful early on, but it can be a little bit unsettling as well because it doesn't give you much in the way of guidelines for what to do. So that's one of the reasons why it's not as widely used. And there's not, I think Scrum has a better PR agency as well. Like you just know more about it, you hear more about it, and so people tend to start there. But we're going to start with Kanban today. So the first one is a visualized workflow, also known as the Kanban board, which most people are very familiar with. Tools like Trello have made this extremely common. But before you go out and start building a Trello board or throwing up sticky notes on a whiteboard somewhere, it's important to start with an actual accurate understanding of how work flows through the team, completely independent of any workflow columns or anything like that. So actually sit down and think about, where does the work come from? Who's asking the team to do work? Who gets to say yes and who gets to say no? Who's applying hopefully some sort of strategic perspective to that work? And then once the team gets a hold of the work, who needs to touch it? How many cycles of review do you need to go through? And probably most importantly, where does the work leave the team? Where do we lose control over it? For some teams, that's in the review process. It's got to go through legal, or the creative director has to sign off on it, whatever it might be. We lose control over that as an Agile team, and that's where our workflow should stop, because we can't optimize that part of the workflow. Or for other teams, they keep that part within their own workflow, but then they have to send it off to a web team for publication or something like that. Whatever it might be, you need to map it out and understand it in detail before you move on to turning it into something like an actual Kanban board. And this is an Agile pro tip. You drop the E down on the done. That helps you get more done. It's not really, it's just a formatting thing. But general Kanban board, right? And everyone's board looks a little bit different, and it should also be a work in progress. It's never going to be perfect, and you can play around with it, but if you start from an accurate understanding of how work gets done, then your board will be in a much better place to start with. So that's the very basic version of a Kanban board. Marketing teams tend to benefit from getting a little more detail on their board because we tend to do a lot of different kinds of work. So one way to do this is to add these horizontal, they're called swim lanes here. And in this instance, we've broken out sort of the different sub-teams within a content marketing group, for example. So the writers have their own lane, the designers have their own lane, the video people have their own lane, and we can still keep track of what everyone else is doing, especially if we have dependencies on one another, but we have our own lanes to monitor our own types of work. One way to kind of get more information out of a traditional Kanban board. Whoops, buttons go the other way. If you can pull this off and get a really nice visualization with good levels of detail, the people who interface with your team will give you this reaction because they know now actually what the team is doing. They understand what you're working on, they understand what's coming up next, and the states that everything is in. They don't have to come to you every 15 minutes and ask what you're working on or when they can expect that thing they asked you for. They just look at the board, and it makes everybody's lives a whole lot easier. So the big question when we talk about Kanban boards is, do I need a physical board or a digital board? The short answer is both. If you can pull off both, get both. But if you have to pick, I would always say start with a physical board because it's very easy to set up and you can change it very easily. If you spend a whole lot of time setting up a fancy digital tool, then you're going to be less likely to change it because you spend a lot of time setting it up. And early on, you don't really know what your workflow is supposed to look like, and it's easier to fiddle with it when it's a physical board. If you're not co-located, if everyone's spread out around different places, then a physical board may not be a possibility. The important thing here is, right, to treat this in an agile way and have it open to experimentation, try something, see what works, and then iterate on it over time. Okay, second Kanban practice these are my favorite. If you don't do anything else that I suggest today, go out and try WIP limits. So work in progress limits. And these can be used on a team, of course, which is what we're talking about, but also as an individual. I use WIP limits to get stuff done and help my husband get things done around the house, with my kids, all these things. It helps you stop starting on a whole bunch of stuff and actually start finishing things. So, how do you know what your WIP limit is supposed to be? Well, if it's too low, for instance, we have a team of 4 here who has put a WIP limit of 1 on their teams in progress column, and it's too low because we're seeing a slow flow. It's taking a long time for work to get from one end to the other, and people on the team are bored. They don't have anything to do. 4 people with a WIP limit of 1, even if they double up, 2 people are sitting around with nothing to do. But if they go up too high, then we still have a slow flow of work. It takes a long time for things to get through, but now it's because even when work is being done, it's in the doing column, people aren't actively working on it. It's just sitting there. So the tasks are idle because there's only 4 people and there's 5 things, there it's back, 5 things to be worked on, and so the tasks are idle. What we want is for the clicker to work. There we go. What we want is to have a WIP limit that's just right in the middle. For this team of 4, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4. It's something that they would experiment with. But we know we've gotten it right when we have a fast flow of work through the team. It doesn't take long once they take something into their process for it to get out the other side and actually be done. And tasks are almost never idle. Once they come into the system, they're being worked on constantly until they're done. But we may have people that are idle. And this is okay. It's okay to have people who are not working 110% of the time. This is known as slack in the Kanban system, and we actually want that. These are the opportunities for marketers to think strategically, to come to events and engage in professional development. All sorts of things like that can happen during these moments of slack. And marketers tend to value ourselves by how busy we are and how many people need us from day to day. So it can be hard to embrace this idea of slack, but it's very magical if you can start incorporating it into a team's workflow. One of the many reasons why it's magical and why WIP limits in general are amazing is because they avoid this very scary problem that is prevalent in all kinds of knowledge work known as context switching. Now, it's good that we're about to go to lunch because this is kind of a downer slide. So you can see here in the nice left-hand side with the green bar, when we're working on one project at a time, we have 100% of our productive time available to work on that thing. That makes sense, right? But then, the farther you move over, the more depressing it gets. Because once you're down to this far end and you're working on 5 things, it doesn't sound like that many, but when you get to that point, only 5% of your working time is now available for each of those items, and you're wasting 75% of your time switching back and forth between tasks. Not great. WIP limits help us stay down on this nice green end, right? So if we have a personal WIP limit of 1 or 2, we can only be working on a couple of things at a time, and we avoid this loss to context switching. This chart, by the way, is from a book called Personal Kanban, and if you're interested in trying out some of this stuff kind of on your own, very, very cool place to start. Okay, third piece of the puzzle here is what's called work item types, also known as classes of service in the Kanban world. What these are is basically buckets. These are categories into which we place work when it comes into the team, which prevents us from having to have an individual discussion and debate about each new piece of work when it comes in. So for instance, we might have work item types based on the level of urgency attached to a project or a piece of work. It might be an expedite item that we need to drop everything and finish before we work on anything else. So if the CMO has a presentation to the board in a couple of days and she comes to you and says, I need slides, then that's what you're doing for the next couple of days, and that's an expedite item. Or if you have a webinar, let's say that would probably fall into a fixed delivery date category because it has a deadline associated with it, as do the email campaigns and social promotion that go along with it. All of those are going to be dealt with similarly by the Agile marketing team. And so they all fall into this same work item type. Standard items, this would be the business as usual, keep the lights on stuff, write the blog posts, fill the social media queues, all these things that we have to do to just keep the wheels of marketing turning. And then finally, we have intangible items, which are going to be nice to haves, right? Things like investigating that digital Trello board or the digital Kanban board that you might want to have. That would be an intangible item that might help the team, but it's not necessarily something that has a level of urgency attached to it. So we saw the swim lanes on the board before, and then now we can add work item types into it to get another level of granularity and more detail, more information about what's going on with the Agile marketing team. So now we've got things broken down, you can see, based on the level of urgency here. And then we might have the different colored cards representing different kinds of work, right? So maybe purple is written content, and then we have blue is video, and the yellow is emails, something like that. And so now we can see a lot more detail about what's going on, who's doing what, and how we're breaking up our time. So if we have a whole bunch of stuff down here in emergency, and that's all we're spending our time on, that's a problem, because we're not devoting time to the strategic stuff that's actually going to move the needle and get us the results that we want. And now we can see that, and it's out there for everybody else to see as well. All right, so fourth piece here are independent cadences. Now this is where we get pretty far away from the Scrum world, because Scrum is all about the sprint cycle, right? We saw the emojis going round and round. Every 2 weeks we have a sprint, or 1 week or 3 weeks, whatever your cycle may be. But in Kanban, we don't have everything attached to that same time box. And instead, we set things up to happen at whatever cadence we want. So we might do our backlog refinement every 2 weeks. But then maybe we have a planning meeting with our executive team in sales every single week. And maybe we have our retrospective every 3 weeks. And we deliver whenever things get done. But it's all separate and independent. And we can adjust all of those knobs to create a process that's really customized to how we work as a team. One Scrum Master, marketing Scrum Master that I suggested this to, like this was her reaction. She started kind of hyperventilating when I suggested breaking things out like this, because she was so pleased with how productive her team had become under Scrum. There was this level of predictability that had been introduced to the team, and she was really nervous about what would happen if we took away the time box. So this is a core component of Kanban, but we're going to talk about a hybrid in a little bit that will allow you to keep the time box. So if this is your response to my get rid of sprint suggestions, don't worry, we're going to come back around to a way to deal with that as well. Okay, fifth and final piece here is the process of continuous improvement. Now remember I said before that Kanban can be applied right away to however you're working right now, and then it's going to start surfacing opportunities to improve. And then you have to actually improve. You have to continuously inspect and adapt this process, because it's not going to look the same way on day 1 as it is going to on day 60 or day 120. So you have to have this very clear cycle of identifying things to do, documenting and planning out how you're going to tackle them, executing against that, and then reviewing on whether or not it worked. And this is why we still need a retrospective meeting where the team gets together and reviews their process. That still has to happen so that we can continuously improve the process. All right, so those are the 5 core pieces of Kanban. We can put those together with our good friend Scrum to create a hybrid known as Scrum Bond. Actually a thing, I did not make that word up. What this is like is getting access to the whole all-you-can-eat Agile buffet. You get all the practices, and you can take the ones that seem like they're going to work best for you and design a custom approach. And this is really cool and exciting if you can make it happen. So Scrum Bond is a hybrid, right? And this is, it's less rigid, less structured than pure Scrum. So it's very pragmatic, right? We're going to make choices that seem like they're going to give us good results, and it's based on a wider systemic understanding, which is really important for marketers because we interface with a whole lot of people. We talk to a whole lot of other groups, and so we need to have a broad understanding of what's going on outside of our team and make pragmatic choices that allow us to deal with those things, because not everyone in an organization will go Agile at the same time. Marketing is a great candidate for starting out, but if we're the first or second or third and there are people around us who haven't gone through it yet, we have to make smart choices about how we're going to handle those interactions and help everybody succeed. Scrum Bond also encourages us to integrate other models and frameworks. So this is Scrum, Kanban, but then also things like theory of constraints, systems thinking, to bring all this stuff in so that we have that whole all-you-can-eat buffet and can take everything that we need to really build and grow our Agile practice over time. It's designed to meet the organization's needs. And this is my favorite thing about it, because it's not about getting better at Scrum or better at Kanban and doing things just for the sake of being better at having a daily stand-up. It's about figuring out what do we need out of daily stand-up and how can we make that meeting work better for us, and not stressing too much about doing everything by the book, which is fantastic for marketers, because as you saw, we don't tend to stick with any of the strict original frameworks anyway. We're just making it up as we go along. And finally, Scrum Bond gives us a wealth of tools to figure out how to solve a lot of the problems that Scrum unearths. People will often blame Agile or blame Scrum for creating all these problems on a team, when actually they were there all the time, and Agile has just brought them to the surface. And now if we have a more sort of robust and varied framework at our disposal, we have more tools to solve those problems that are being unearthed. So that's what I mean when I say Scrum Bond. And it can, and often does, include that sprint time box that makes many of us really comfortable. And this is my favorite explanation for why the time box can still matter, even in a world that works best with Kanban. So this is from Eli Goldratt's Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, which is at the back of his book, The Goal. If you haven't read, big fan. You should check that one out too. But the assumption for him in applying a Kanban framework is that it's operating in a stable environment. And I don't know about you, but I've never been on a marketing team that I would characterize as stable. Nothing is ever really stable. So this is, I think, a very nice illustration of why that is. So radio, 38 years to reach 50 million users. TV did it in 13. Guesses on how long it took Instagram? 18 months. And who knows what the next one's going to be, right? And then whatever it is that's out there that's reaching 50 million people, we need to be there as marketers. We're expected to keep up with this pace of change. So stability, not so much a part of our profession anymore, which is okay. And because of that, the time box can be a nice intuitive way of chunking up our work and making us feel comfortable as we're going along and applying Agile in the world of marketing. It's just more suitable for these unstable environments. So keeping the time box is not right out if you want to use Scrum Bond in an Agile marketing environment. We can have both things. I will say, whatever system you end up putting into place, however you end up, whatever your plate looks like when you come back from the Agile buffet, make sure you have these 4 things with you. You need all of these to make Agile work, no matter what framework you're using. So we have the backlog, right? That's our prioritized to-do list that the team uses to pick its work. Got to have that, or the team isn't going to know what the most important item is. They're not going to know what to pull for their next piece of work. You need to have a daily stand-up. I know nobody likes to do it every day, but you really need to do it every day. And only lasts 15 minutes. Get in the habit, and it will become one of the most valuable ways that you spend your time. This applies for Kanban, Scrum, Scrum Bond, whatever. Just do the daily stand-up. A visualized workflow of some kind, It doesn't have to be as advanced as some of the ones that we looked at before. It might be super simple, but you do need some kind of visualized representation of what the team is working on, so they know, everyone outside the team knows, and it surfaces lots of opportunities for improvement when you document things in this way. And that retrospective meeting that I mentioned before. This is a time for the team alone to get together and talk about the process, do that inspect and adapt cycle so they can continue to improve their process, whatever it ultimately ends up looking like. Okay, so all well and good for me to talk about this stuff hypothetically, right? But everybody wants to know about who's doing it and who's doing it well. So I'm going to close by telling you a story of a group that's doing it really, really well and seeing some really great results from using Agile in their marketing team. So the sort of, this is the brainchild of Cameron von Orman. And as you can see, he works at CA Technologies. He's our SVP of Product and Solutions Marketing. And Cameron comes from a tech background. He used to manage the app development guys. And so he knew about Agile. His app development teams used it. And as he started moving into more of this product marketing role, he thought, some of this Agile stuff seems like it would apply to the marketers that I'm managing. Maybe we should try and experiment and see if we can figure this out. But he recognized that this was not a one-to-one translation. The way that the app development teams worked was not exactly the way that his marketers were working. The app folks tended to be, smaller, co-located, and they were used to working on little projects with pretty quick turnaround times. Whereas the marketers are not co-located, they're spread out, and we're used to our beautiful annual marketing plan that spans the whole year, and we work on the same thing for a really long time. But he thought it was worth trying out anyway. And he kind of lucked out because as he's thinking about this, CA bought Rally, which is local to Colorado, and they made Agile project management software. And the marketing team inside of Rally was already starting to experiment with using Agile. And so Cameron decided to just let them keep doing their thing. They were going to be sort of the pilot inside of the marketing organization, and everybody would keep an eye on them and see how things went. They experimented for a couple of quarters and loved it. Getting great results, everybody's happy. And so then it was time to see if they could translate their experience to everybody else inside of CA. And so that was a pretty big jump from phase 1 of this experiment to phase 2. Because at Rally, we had a co-located team, just that one group. And now we have widely distributed global teams all over the world. We went from a group of experienced Agile marketers, not necessarily experienced with using Agile, but they had been marketing an Agile tool. So they knew the terminology, they understood the frameworks, and there's a whole bunch of folks in CA's marketing that had no idea what Agile was or why they should care. They went from a SaaS product, single digital product, to multiple products, some of which were physical on-premises things. And then we had the single product that was the project management software over to a whole bunch of things that are at various stages of their life cycle. So lots more complexity in this second go-round. Because of all these changes, they wanted to make sure that they were actually getting the results they wanted. And there were 2 things they were concerned with. The first was, is this good for marketers? Are the marketers happier? Are they going to stick around? Are they more productive? And is it good for the business? Is this good for the bottom line? And they did something that a lot of people fail to do when they are trying out Agile marketing, which is they documented the heck out of it. And so they knew exactly what benefits they were getting. So they had an employee satisfaction survey that they ran before and after they started using Agile with the marketers. And the results were pretty spectacular. So the marketers are more engaged, they're proud to work for CA, they're way more likely to recommend this as a great place to work, they're more involved in the decisions that affect their professional lives, and they feel way more valued as an employee. And not only are these results tons better in the before and after view, these are better than everyone else at CA as well. So the marketers are now happier than most employees at CA, which is not an accurate description of most marketing teams that I know. So yes, good for the marketers, makes them happy, so that's good. The second criterion, is it good for the business? And again, they tracked this very carefully. And so again, easy for them to say that yes, we're getting better results using this framework. better 20% improvement in pipeline without raising the budget. They can now deliver a campaign in 2 weeks as opposed to 2 months on average, and they've tripled their win rate for marketing sourced opportunities. All good things. And so now they are enjoying all of these benefits. And these are from our State of Agile Marketing survey that I mentioned. These are what the Agile marketing teams as a group are enjoying. And thanks to CA's experimental pilot approach, they've gotten to a lot of these places really, really quickly. And now they're using this across their whole marketing function. They've got persistent cross-functional campaign teams that are serving all their business units, and the whole marketing function works this way now. And they're seeing outstanding results. Those same results from the initial pilot are now spread out for everybody. So, no need to be stuck with Scrum as Windex. We can apply a vast array of tools to our problems. Agile offers us a lot of ways to clean up the mess that is often our marketing process. That's me. If you're interested in learning more about this, my company Agile Sherpas does a public training here in Denver. Our next one will be in October. You can become a certified professional in Agile marketing, and that's the bit.ly link for it. And I'm up here afterwards if you have questions. Thank you.